So we are now streaming live on Facebook through South Carolina Educational Television. Want to welcome everyone to the last faculty lounge of the semester with our very special guest, my dear friend, Dr. Andre Perry. So Andre, before we jump into the dialogue and conversation, I'm going to read a quick bio so that we can introduce the audience to exactly who you are and your brilliance. So Dr. Andre Perry is a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings. He's a scholar in residence at American University and a columnist for the Hechinger Report. A nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, Perry is a regular contributor to MSNBC and has been published by the New York Times, The Nation, The Washington Post, TheRoot.com, and CNN.com. Perry has also made appearances on CNN, CBS, NPR, NBC, and ABC. His research focuses on race and structural inequality, education, and economic inclusion. In 2015, Perry served on Louisiana Governor-elect John Bel Edwards' K-12 Education Transition Committee, as well as on New Orleans Mayor-elect Mitch Landrieu's transition team as its co-chair for education in 2010. In 2013, he founded the College of Urban Education at Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And preceding his stint in Michigan, he was an associate professor of educational leadership at the University of New Orleans and served as CEO of the Capital One University of New Orleans Charter Network. Welcome, 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 Andre. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, my good friend, Toby, how are you?
Doing well. So I always start the faculty lounge with the same question on cultural history. So I ask every guest the same question. And what's fantastic about this conversation with you is that you're also a scholar who always starts from your own beginning. All right. So even in the book that we will discuss today, this book, Know Your Price, your entire first chapter is your own cultural, familial, community story. So I just want you to share a bit of that with the audience. Go back to the beginning. So before becoming a scholar, tell me a little about where you're from, your upbringing, how that matters to you, and how has your culture and your community experience influenced who you are professionally?
You know, and I'll tell you the story that was told to me as a child growing up. There was an old woman whose name is Elsie Boyd. I call her Mom. When I was born in 1970 in Pittsburgh, there was a deal made between Mom and my maternal grandmother that Mom would take me to her home in 1320 Hill Avenue in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small majority Black municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on three sides. And my mother at the time, my biological mother, she was poor. She already had a child, my brother, when she was 15, had me when she was 17. And my mother was probably abused. And so there was a deal made, and you know how Black women do. They get together, they talk, they figure out a plan of action, and that's what happened. So when I was born, the same day, Mom took me home. And my brother came along in tow. And along the way, she raised probably about 12 to 15 kids of varying durations. Some would stay a few weeks. Some would stay like myself till I graduated from high school, went on to college. And we all had a similar story. We grew up in Pittsburgh during a time when there was an economic collapse. U.S. Steel was pulling out. Westinghouse Corporation was downsizing. Unemployment was high. And as the saying goes, or it should be adapted, when white people catch a cold, Black people catch COVID. And so we were struggling. And the way that Black women dealt with struggle is to organize. So I found myself in this house informally adopted. I consider her mom, but I had all the comforts and assets in front of me that led to whatever rise I may have been. So I had in this town there was a library, parks, a shopping district. There it was not that far from the University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, Carlow College. There were all these universities and colleges nearby. I had transportation hubs. And I was a runner in high school. I ran cross country, and I would run down the main drag, and I would see my parents' friends and colleagues working in the shops, and I would run down the main drag of Penn Avenue, and I didn't know I crossed into Pittsburgh because it was so indistinguishable from Pittsburgh where I lived, that the only way I knew I was in Pittsburgh, I could smell cookies. And because there was a Nabisco cookie factory right right along the Pittsburgh border. And that's what I knew I was in Pittsburgh, because most of my life I had no idea where Wilkinsburg changed into Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh changed into Wilkinsburg. And so I say that to say that for someone living in a Black community, a lot of times we lived in a place that we were comforted, we were protected, we were affirmed. We saw people of different walks of life, from people who are working to the drug dealer. Speaking of drugs, one of the reasons why there was a deal made, my father was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison. He was probably abusive to my mother. And the reason why I bring that up for this book, Know Your Price, I actually followed where he lived to really get a sense of how he lived and what contributed to his death. Because for most of my life, I really never paid much attention to my father. I never talked about his story. They used to tell me he died breaking up a fight in prison. Now, I didn't believe that, because I was like, dude, ain't a good Samaritan in prison. But I knew then that they tried to relay a narrative that humanized him. And so I followed where he lived in my book to just get a sense of how he lived and how he died. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I will say that a part of my journey was to look at home prices. And I looked at home prices in Black majority cities where the share of the Black population is greater than 50%. And I compared them to places where the share of the Black population is less than 1%. And most people know that homes in Black neighborhoods are priced lower. In fact, they're about half as much if you don't control for any other factors. But people will say they're lower because of education and crime. But those are things you can control for in a study. So that's what I did. I controlled for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what we found is that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, we're losing about $156 billion in lost equity. Now, the narrative is that the problems in Black neighborhoods are a direct result of the people in them. That's that white supremacist myth. But the reality is that there's policies that are robbing Black people of the resources to climb social, economic, and political ladders. And so my upbringing, one, was a great one. But I tell people all the time, if the homes were valued properly, one, my father's drug use probably wouldn't be criminalized. He probably have a greater opportunity Well, he would have gone to better schools. Could remember the money, the value of a home ultimately leads to how much taxes are assessed by municipalities, leading to schooling, policing, infrastructure, and all those other municipal services. And so I learned through this book that my father died to a single stab wound to the heart the day before his 27th birthday. Now, and he died at 7 in the morning, which probably meant he didn't die trying to break up a fight. He probably died in his sleep. Somebody got him. But now when I tell the story, I say, yeah, he may have died at the hands of another inmate, but housing devaluation, discrimination was an accomplice. And, you have on the t-shirt that has the quote that's throughout my book: there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And, for many of us who grew up in Black neighborhoods, we know that there's nothing wrong with us. We see where the real problems are. And it wasn't until I got to college when I read the Moynihan Report, which was, for those who don't know, Patrick Moynihan was a senator, but at the time he was the undersecretary for the Department of Labor, and he wrote this report that essentially stated that Black families are inherently unstable because they're headed by women. Now, when I read that report in college, I go, are you saying my mom put me in harm's way? And I became very offended by that. Like, very, I remember
she protected me and saved my life. Like, if it wasn't,
I mean, saved my life. And you're telling me she's putting me in harm's way. So I remember at that point, I wasn't a policy expert then, but I remember at that point, I started saying, wow, policy is really a reflection of values, and that, and then it was a revelation that all these policies don't share or understand the values of my community. They don't share or understand the values of my mother, my father. And so for me, growing up in Pittsburgh in the way that I did was not a story of disparity or deficit. It is one of strength. My story is I hate when the Olympics or football comes on and you have these athletes say, I came from nothing. I came from the bottom. No, you didn't. Nothing. Something doesn't come from nothing.
Yes.
You come from greatness and more than life. If you achieved all this, it wasn't by yourself.
Yes. Say that again. Something doesn't come from nothing. Yes.
Yeah. So for me, it's like now I get to talk about in my work the assets in Black communities that are undervalued because of racism. And so for me, now I get to tell my story. I get to tell a redemptive story of my father and all the other men like him and all the other women like my mother, that society deems as, welfare queens, lazy, blah, blah, blah. Now I get to show, with narrative and data, because both are important. You just show data, you're not going to change people. People aren't necessarily moved by data.
Yeah.
And data framed wrongly is just, can be bad. So you need the narrative. And I run my data through the lived experience of my community.
Yeah. So, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And so I do want to get into like how you got here. Cause like you and I go way back to grad school at the University of Maryland. And I know you as an education scholar, kind of strictly education scholar. I think your doctorate is in like maybe higher ed, but ed policy and leadership. Yeah. And so, But then I know you broaden your career, you know, like particularly when you went to New Orleans and you were doing P through 20 work,
Yeah.
and in leading the UNO Charter School Network. But this particular book expands it even more, right? Because it's like you're looking at the big picture kind of social experiences that impact things like education. So, you know, we have a lot of education scholars here, you know, in the webinar, and so can you just share with us a bit about how, from being an education scholar, how you moved into this wider work and why this particular project at this moment?
Wow. When I was in New Orleans, I went to New Orleans in 2004 as assistant professor, and I studied immigrant educational rights. A lot
Yes,
of
I remember that because you would come up to Penn State
That's exactly
and work
right.
with our migrant students. Yeah,
I ran camps for the children of migrant workers
yeah.
for 15 years in Pennsylvania, and and always striving to provide access to educational opportunities for the children of migrant workers. That was my thing. And I pursued that as a dissertation topic. Should undocumented immigrants receive financial aid? It was related to my migrant experience. And I really was a higher ed policy person, an immigration policy person. But when I got to New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina happened. And the dean at the time asked me to um, oversee the charter schools that the university already had. I didn't know anything of really about K-12 education. I mean, but I did know a lot about federal policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so because the federal government was coming down, my job essentially was to be the conduit between the federal government coming down, federal policy, state policy, and managing the people who actually run the school through the university. And then it became clear to me that there was much to be desired with the charter school movement, that this idea of decentralizing the system caused great harm in other aspects. Black teachers were fired as a result in New Orleans. You had the students expelled and suspended at amazingly high rates. There wasn't a collective. There was a lot of disparagement against the school board. And if you're from Louisiana, if you're from the South, you know that Black school boards have always been under attack by the larger society. And so those critiques for me felt like part of that larger attack on Black institutions. So, and I always say, you know, Black school boards are treated like Black people, like they are, they are criminalized, they are demonized, all that. So I became really disaffected. The thing that really moved me to this other direction was people kept saying, if we could only fix the school, everything will be all right. And I could see them abdicating the responsibility of dealing with the job market, dealing with housing, dealing with transportation, all these other factors that are actually more influential collectively than what goes on in a school. And so when you realize that kids don't live in schools, they live in communities, you then try to change the aspect of the community that's limiting schools.
Yes.
That's what brought me to housing, business, all these other areas. And I just started to explore. And once I started exploring, it was like, wow, we're blaming teachers when we're not even giving the school a chance right off the top. I mean, housing alone, the devaluation of housing alone is taking resources away from school districts like you wouldn't believe. I mean, schools predominated by people of color get $23 billion less, $23 billion less than schools that are predominated by white students. 23 billion. Now, a lot of that is because of the way we fund education through property taxes, and we know that segregated housing and hoarding in certain districts impacts how much money those districts get.
Mhm.
And so, but that in itself is tells you, oh, it ain't about the teachers as much as you think. It's not
Yeah.
about, bootstrapping students, like that's crazy.
Yeah, no
No
matter
white
what
person,
strategies, no pedagogy, all this stuff or
yeah,
whatever. Like, because we tend to study education in a bubble and not
absolutely.
like as it is a function of society and all these systems that impact it.
And to your point, when I want people to get from Know Your Price, I want educators to read it because I want
Yes.
them to see it's not just about curriculum and instruction. It's not just about what goes on in the school. Schools are part of a community, an important part,
Mhm.
very important, but they're part of a larger system. And we've got to be able, as educators, connect the dots between criminal justice, healthcare, education, housing, and the right now a lot of my work is hot because when COVID hit, um, it exposed the wealth inequalities. It exposed the housing insecurity.
Mhm.
It exposed the lack of broadband. All those things that should have been in
Mhm.
place for a kid to go to school
Yeah.
and do well, and they're not there. So that's why I really want educators to read this book because we got to stop this. If we could only fix the school philosophy, because that in itself is part of a racist trope that
Mhm.
says that Black people are deficient, they need to be filled with some information, and that's just not true. I mean,
Yeah.
give me the resources, cut the check.
Mhm.
Don't browbeat me with this, if you just learn more, as if people get the Harvard. I mean, the thing that kills me, what's the I won't, well, I'll say his name, the educator, Steve Perry, right?
Yeah.
Who, made a name for himself by, essentially saying what's wrong with Black people. Go get a haircut, pull up your pants, as if white people get into Harvard because of their belt wearing strategies. No, it's
Mhm.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. But we constantly blaming Black people
Mhm.
for the state that we're in. There's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. We need to look at policy, focus on the policy that impacts Black communities. And that's why I look at majority Black cities and neighborhoods, because it allows me to see the impact on race on these other assets.
Well, to that point, right? So, what I like about this concentrated focus on Blackness, Black lives, Black property, and Black cities, right? So, even in the book, you talk about how you frame the focusing on valuing Blackness by first discussing the practice of white centering
Yeah.
in research and how that's problematic. And you kind of share the backstory of how you were first introduced to it in grad school, and then you talk about what actually needs to be centered. If you're like really trying to make an impact in a community, that you need to center the community. But can you give us tell us the backstory of, explain what white centering is and kind of how you were introduced to it when you were first being taught how to do
Yeah.
research?
You know, white centering is a concept that a lot of folks are hearing now in literary circles, because of, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, the great author Toni Morrison, Mama Toni. Mama Toni introduced this idea of why are we centering whiteness in all these stories?
Mhm.
Um, I want to center Black people. I don't need to talk about white people in my story or make them a central character. You don't need to. Same is true in research. But when you go to grad school and you learn something like regression analysis, the first thing you learn is to compare everyone else to white men. So the idea of a lot of educators on the call, even the very idea of the achievement gap is predicated on this notion that everything will be better if we catch up to white people. And that is white centering.
Mhm.
When in fact, a lot of the problems, I won't say most, I won't qualified that way. But a lot of the problems that we want to find solutions to, you don't have to compare Black people to white people to solve. You can focus on Black people. and the problem with white centering is that it pits Black people as a problem needing to catch up. And no one invests in problems. No one invests in problems. You invest in the people who are fixed, or the people who are supposedly good, to fix the Black people. That's why education is littered with white saviors. We're constantly asking white people to fix Black people instead of getting the investment to Black people. So I want to center Black people in my research. Not to say that there's that we don't have infrastructure needs, housing needs, but when we fix them, we better be investing in Black people while we're fixing them. And that's the point. You got to center Black people if you want to help Black people. Yeah. Everything else is like, who are you helping then? You're helping a narrative that is furthering the plight of Black people. That's the only thing you're helping when you work with those assumptions. So
yeah, it's like you're driving and you looking over here.
Exactly.
You know exactly. Where's your car gonna go?
Exactly. Yeah. I like that. I'm going to be using that. I'm going to be using that. So I know there's this rule, no biting allowed, but I'm going to bite that.
Yeah. So listen, you there's so many gems in this book. You talk about your hometown, Wilkinsonburg, right? So this community in Pittsburgh, but there's one section where you discuss what was deemed the Wilkinsonburg massacre in 2016. And I don't want to focus on the details of the incident, but rather your read of the media commentary that occurred after it. So you give me a second, because I want to get them through it before I have you comment on it. So this was a situation where 2 young Black men shot up a backyard party. They killed several people. And you share this quote that the local media anchor made, and I'm going to read it for everybody, right? So she says, "You needn't be a criminal profiler to draw a mental sketch of the killers who broke so many hearts 2 weeks ago Wednesday. They are young Black men, likely in their teens or in their early 20s. They have multiple siblings from multiple fathers. Their mothers work multiple jobs. These boys have been in the system before. They've grown up there. They know the police. They've been arrested." Right. So now, of course, she was fired. But in your reaction, we know she was fired. But in your reaction to the comments, you don't name them as just being racially insensitive. You also stress the point that the mental sketch that she gave, or the mental sketch in the minds of many people, not just her, isn't dissimilar to the description of young Black people who had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. And I thought this was a poignant statement, right? Because what she stated was a description of more of a life circumstance, not a criminal profile.
That's right.
So you can have a different father than your sisters and brothers and not commit a crime. Your mom can work 3 jobs and you not commit a crime, right? You could have even been in the system before and not be guilty of this particular crime. So in my opinion, this almost helps us to understand how it can become regular life for like a teacher to walk into a classroom and then begin to mentally group kids as good and bad, you know what I'm saying, based on race and the way that they frame out students. So you also make this assertion that when it comes to urban development, that leaders tend to invest in buildings and not people.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the reason for this is that advancement and growth comes from an investment in people who are trusted, and that Black people are not among the trusted. So unpack all of this first. Help us to understand this idea of the trusted people.
Yeah, I'm going to start with this newscaster, because let me tell you, she was fired for prejudging, as a news analyst, prejudging who the murderers were. Now, you hit the nail on the head. That description is me.
Yes.
I was like,
I was just thinking when you were talking about your background, I'm like, yeah, you hit all of it. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, but the scary part is we could chalk that up as an individual incident. But the reality is that economic development organizations, lenders, real estate agents, teachers, you name it, are either viewed like that or view like that.
Mm.
You know, and so it's not a isolated incident. The prejudging not only robs people of life and liberty, it's also robbing people of mundane everyday resources, extracting wealth that also contributes to our downfall. So the reason why I focus on housing is also to show that one newscaster that her attitudes are shared by appraisers. Her attitudes are
Yeah.
shared by real estate agents, by lenders. It's not an isolated incident. And so going to this issue of trust, you always see these developments going on all in cities everywhere. And you know, you always like, who's this going to benefit ultimately? And you know who it's going to benefit, because who starts is who finishes. When Black people are involved in the conception, development, the physical building, the investment, it's going to benefit Black people. But when Black people aren't included, and there's this term called placemaking that I critique in the, and it's a term that's used to talk about how developers and planners restructure areas, plan areas in ways that are supposed to be helpful for the communities. But if the communities are never involved, it's only helpful for the developers themselves. And so for me, in my town of where I grew up, Google, there's a Google headquarters there now. And before, and now it's in the cookie factory that was there. Now, instead of smelling vanilla wafers, I smell the other kind of vanilla wafers, right? So I go in the city, and it looks very white, and you're like, how can this be? Oh, it's like that because Black people weren't involved in the planning, and Black people weren't involved in the planning because Black people aren't trusted. Look at the other evidence. When Black people don't get, we're twice less likely to receive business loans, and when we do get loans, they're at higher interest rates. That's predicated on this notion that we're riskier. And you saw this during the housing crisis. Black people with worthy credit were giving substandard loans. So it's apparent. Black people aren't trusted with money. We're just not. And that's just not sustainable, because all communities need investment for growth. Nothing grows without investment. And that means putting capital in the hands of people, actual people. If you invest in brick and mortar and not people, you are essentially encouraging gentrification. Property prices rise. Black people can't keep up with it. They're pushed out. And so you have to invest in people first, then place. But what you see all over the country, people will say, "Oh, I'll invest in that commercial corridor and not give a dime." I was going to say a damn dime to the Black business owners in the area.
Yeah.
That they'll say, "We're going to make this community great, but not make sure that housing is affordable for Black people." And so eventually, if we want to see growth, the kind of growth I want to see, you have just got to invest in Black people. I'll say this one thing that's not in the book. I did another study in which we scraped Yelp data. The good folks, my writing partner, Jonathan Rothwell, at Gallup. He has a team over there that they do all this amazing stuff. Because if I get the data, we're running with it. So they scraped all the Yelp data for us so that we could see the business quality in Black neighborhoods versus white neighborhoods. What we found is that Black, brown, and Asian businesses actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts in Black neighborhoods. But they get less revenue, or Black people get less revenue as the concentration of Black people increases in a neighborhood. To put that plain, people are avoiding quality in Black neighborhoods. Now, there's a saying that the elders would utter that I used to hear all the time growing up in Pittsburgh. They would say, our ice is just as cold. Mm-hmm. Our ice is just as cold, because they knew if you bypass quality in the hood, you distort the market in a way where, one, you're going to bring less revenue in, but then you have high quality businesses competing with low quality businesses.
Yeah.
And they knew, hey, we have doctors, we have stores, we have restaurants.
That's the power of racially biased marketing.
That's exactly
that will teach you that what you want to have, or what's good, or what's the special, is this fake food at McDonald's than the soul food at the restaurant right there, like the real quality food.
The real quality food. Mm-hmm. But to your point, we've been conditioned not to value Black goods.
Blackness. Yeah.
I mean, and it doesn't, but the crazy part is when we do utilize Black services, we're like, oh shit, this is great. This is good stuff. And then, but we know that because we're familiar. Mm-hmm. But we're losing the country, the economy is losing revenue and productivity because we're denying ourselves quality. Yeah. So the investments in Black neighborhoods isn't taking away from white neighborhoods. That's just crazy. An investment in Black people and Black neighborhoods would help the economy expand, grow. Mm-hmm. You would add talent, add revenue, add productivity. So we're also seduced by this notion of scarcity, that if we give to Black people, we're taking from white people. No. In fact, that we've been working with the assumption of the opposite is true, that if we give to white people, then it'll trickle down somehow to Black people. No, like, invest in Black people. We're trustworthy.
Meanwhile, they're like, no, I'm eating everything on my plate. Exactly. I'm not giving you any.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, so let's dig into this a little bit, because you have a chapter called Buy Back the Block.
Yeah.
And this one is particularly special to me because I don't even know if you know this, but many years ago, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 years ago, I made this commitment to try to raise up the community that raised me here in South Carolina.
Yeah, right? I remember that.
You do. Okay, yeah. So my home neighborhood had been bought by investors, and people, didn't live in the neighborhood, and they were really slumlords, like putting people in homes who didn't have the capacity to keep them up, and or didn't have the knowledge base to demand for their landlords to maintain the houses that they deserved. You know what I'm saying? Because it's really the landlord's responsibility. And but my parents still loved their little community, and that was their house. Like, they bought that house when they were in their 20s. And I knew they were going to die in that house, regardless of how much crime was going on, around them, whatever. So rather than waiting for white folks to kind of come in and eventually gentrify the neighborhood, I was like, let me invest in my old neighborhood and help in that capacity. To start have some control over the community. And I think I was living in like Pennsylvania or something at the time, but as a single woman, it was a sacrifice, right? So I had to make a conscious decision to own like 2 modest homes as opposed to one big one, right? So the decisions and stuff, right? But so my dad recently passed away, and he died in their house, as I suspected. And I do feel good that like I was able to safeguard my parents in their elder years, that at least they were able to live in peace with what was immediately surrounding them, like the houses right next door to them. But economically, like now some stuff is happening, and we live in town, which is what we call here kind of near downtown.
Mhm.
And so like all the other downtowns now, it is becoming gentrified. And but my family, has control over two adjoining properties, et cetera. But one of the things that motivated me more so than anything else was learning from my parents' commitment to their Black community in the first place, right? You weren't going to talk them out of their Black community. You weren't going to get them to move out of their Black community. And it taught me to remember what it used to be for me, because it was a beautiful place to live, and what it could be if we made it that way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if we reinvested in it. So in this chapter, you kind of talk about the negative impacts of integration on the economic infrastructure of the Black community. And that's something that a lot of Black people talk about. I know my parents did. I grew up
Yeah.
always knowing the difference between like integration and equal opportunity. Like that
Right.
they were different things. But it's not talked about a lot publicly. So help us to understand this issue of like how integration impacted the economic infrastructure and the utility of Black people reinvesting in Black neighborhoods.
Yeah, so what's interesting is there's a lot to be said about white flight and in Black communities, because a lot of Black communities were formed because of white flight. Now, not all, particularly in the South. You've always had Black majority communities in the
Mhm.
South, because there were periods of time where Black people was the
We're the majority of
predominant.
the state. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So you've always had Black towns, but in particular, there were places in which the Black people and white people actually did live together. Black people actually did own things, and then when white people left, it eroded the tax base, and things started to decline. That in itself, I just want to take a pause there. The white people leaving, abandoning towns, was the reason why
Mhm.
many towns like that suffered, not because of the people in it. But what's interesting is we choose not to invest in the people who stay in
Mhm.
towns. Like, and it's the seamstress, it's the laundromat owner, it's the folks who are just saying, no, this is who we are. This is what we're committed to. In many of these places, the home prices are so low that you can actually go into a community and buy an entire block. You
Mhm.
can't. I mean, you can sometimes buy, 8, 9 parcels for under $100,000 in
$100,000,
some
yeah.
places, right?
Mhm.
And I've been one of the reasons why I put that in the book is because we need to claim places. And part of our legacy is this story of claiming place, even when white people abandon it, that and we got to claim it, develop it. Now, when we do claim it, this is where racism really kicks in, that we can't get the money to develop the place. We get family and friends dollars to buy a block, but we investors won't invest in the development, and that's what I highlight in
Mhm.
that one chapter. But the reality is that many cities, white people abandon. Like if you're talking about Detroit, I don't want to hear anything negative about Black Detroiters. They stuck with the city when
Mhm.
companies, many white residents chose not to support the city. And, and so we got to really acknowledge that and invest in the people who are there.
Mhm.
And so for me, buying back the block is about claiming space. It's about knowing that we can have the commercial corridor, we can have the neighborhoods that are self-sustaining, and we shouldn't want for people who don't want us. you know, and that is just a real, you know, who will abandon us,
Mhm.
who will mistreat us, who will do it. I mean, and so invest in people who love the city, you know, not in people who want to bolt to the suburbs.
Or both to
You know,
wherever you aren't.
that's right.
If you move out to the suburbs and they're coming back downtown, but
Exactly.
wherever you aren't is where they want to be.
Exactly. And what's interesting, we do a lot of in terms of economic development. When white people move to the suburbs, oh, we have to do regionalism, not you know, focus on downtown. When white people move downtown, oh, we need to focus on downtown. And it's like, no, no, invest in the people who are dedicated to place.
Mm-hmm.
And and for me, I want to make sure that we solidify our dedication by buying back the block, because in some areas of the country we can and we should. And I know it's hard, it's hard work, but it's worth it at the end of the day. It's because we're talking about intergenerational wealth here. We're talking about, and not just about wealth, it's about preserving communities, making communities. Not to say that we, you know, we can't transform the community into something else, because I say that in the book as well. We need a sort of an Afro-futuristic vision of what a Black community should be, not in comparison to what white people want, not in response to racism, but what kind of community do we want to see absent of those things?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that really excited me, because, like, you know, my heart was warmed with the amount of space that you gave to discussing this important. Like, I'm always calling it, like, you know, people talk about like culturally relevant pedagogy. It's almost like culturally, you know, authentic spaces or culturally relevant community development. You know, but you were talking about how we don't need neighborhoods that are built based on other people's values and needs, and it made me think of Carter G. Woodson, because that's what he was saying about education, that a Black kid doesn't need a white education. They need an education that will help them succeed in their own unique social world. And that's what you're talking about in the realm of community development, right? And so, and you talk about even giving specific examples like spoken word and poetry spaces as being culturally important spaces. So, you know, I like that because that's been my platform. Like as I've looked at the culturally developing college campuses, right? I've often used spoken word as the platform. And, you know, when I was reading this particular chapter in the book, it came to me, I was like, well, how could people expect, like, people who created what we call soul food and soul music to live soulless lives in these dead, deserted communities, right? And so you're talking about like this Black urbanist, futuristic kind of view of a culturally sustaining community development that, you know, I absolutely love. And I think it's relevant. I think it's relevant to how you plan larger communities and even how you plan college campuses. Because I was really thinking about you know, planning out transforming a college campus. You could identify that same type of thing, like investing in the people and not necessarily just this constant building of buildings and everything, but what do the people need to live there?
You know, let me tell you another, like, I can't stand it that white people will want murals, they want like artifacts of Black people, but they don't want us to be their neighbor. You know, like you see this all the time. They'll celebrate Black imagery, but when it comes down to it, they want our labor. You know, whiteness. I should say whiteness wants Black labor. You know, but they don't want us to be neighbors. So I want to put that there. Then we are enough. We are enough. We have the know-how, the skills, the culture, you know, and it will sustain us. And we have got to trust that. And I think we do trust it, but we also need the investment. You know, that we deserve the same kind of respect and dollars as someone wanting to build up a lifeless high rise that lacks soul, that lacks culture. And so for me, it's like, provide the investment, provide the invest. You know, I for this book, I read a lot about everything from Rosewood to Greenwood, Black Wall Street to Richmond, all the Black areas that had either a commercial corridor or a neighborhood that really was self-sustaining. The only thing that stopped those places were white people tearing them down.
Yeah.
So it's happened. It can happen even in an age of Amazon. I mean, so we do need to figure out ways to create commercial corridors in which I saw somebody talk about the candy lady's house. There's always a candy lady in every community. Let's be real about that. I used to get my little now or later and the string licorice from the candy lady. But those are the.
But that's entrepreneurship. No matter how old you are, you can still run your little store. Right. You know, like
look. I said this in the book that we need to stop, or maybe I didn't, but we need to stop calling these side hustles and diminishing it.
Yes,
these are businesses.
Yes,
these are businesses. This is entrepreneurialism, right? And we need to develop our commercial corridors accordingly. We need businesses that are serving the neighborhood, and we need high growth industries to locate themselves in Black neighborhoods. So if you are a tech firm, you're a Black tech entrepreneur, you shouldn't have to go to the innovation district, that is largely white. You should be able to do that in the comforts of your community, because in many places they still have the gaze that the newscaster had. And so that's why Black communities are so important for me, because I can walk in them and be affirmed.
Yeah.
And actually be rewarded economically if we invest wisely and smartly.
Yeah. So I just want to post two quick questions from students, because Paige Finney's question went into some of those neighborhoods that you mentioned, like the Rosewood and the Black Wall Street, et cetera. But one of the things she's asking is the idea of Black communities and their value increasing within Black communities reminds me of Malcolm X's ideals that Black people should remain segregated and that Black people should create and build our own equitable economic ecosystems without white people included. I know the history of white people burning Black businesses down and not wanting this to happen, such as the story of Black Wall Street, et cetera. Do you think these types of occurrences from the past have shifted Black communities' present beliefs on creating our own wealthy ecosystems? Like, how do you think our world would look today if we continue to be separate yet economically build our own, communities, whatever? Because I think you can't deny, terrorism is powerful, and it has a living memory that people remember those things.
It's an incredibly discouraging act to either one, set fire to bomb places. I mean, let's be clear about that. But most of the conflagration of Black towns happens economically. It happens through a lack of investment. I mean, the Greenwood districts, the Black Wall Street stories are very explosive. I mean, no pun intended, but they're big. But the everyday story of banks not letting out loans to certain areas of town, that's every day to this day. And my response to this, the Black ecosystem, I actually want integrated communities. I just don't want to be run by white people. Like, the thing is that when I talk about Detroit as a majority Black city, there's still white people living in it. There's still Asian folks living in it. And even in the past, our Black communities, a lot of them weren't totally Black. But the hierarchy was there. We can actually have integrated communities with Blackness being the centerpiece. And that's what's so hard for people to hold on
Right.
to.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it can't be good if Black people are, or Blackness, I should say, if Blackness is the centerpiece of a neighborhood. It can't be good. That's the dissonance that is in a lot of people's heads. And so I want to see integration because I do believe um, Martin Luther King was right. Segregation will always lead to some type of violence. You know, it just leads there.
Mhm.
But what I'm striving for is to make sure that you can actually build a town around Blackness.
Mhm.
And let's be clear, our economic power, our educational strength, our cultural influence, you know, there's so much you could create a town around
Mhm.
where I can walk down and see statues of people who look like the woman who raised me. In
Yeah.
fact, we should have a statue of the woman who raised
Yes.
me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we should see stores that sell the kind of products we need.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should see restaurants that sell the kind of like and it should increase the value of a neighborhood, regardless who's it. I could actually see, even make this claim. You can have a majority white city or neighborhood that can run with Blackness at the center.
Mhm.
Like, you know, that the, Black culture is a good thing.
Mhm.
Like the same, like, and I hate to, you know, don't want to go backwards, but talking about my mother really and heartens me and empowers me because she showed me what a community is really about. To take in kids who aren't necessarily of your blood, of your genetics, and to form community.
Mhm.
That's Black. That's the power of Blackness.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah. Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
blacker than that. I mean, Black women, they make community.
Yeah. Yes.
And that is a contribution that you can actually build a nation on.
Mhm.
That's what democracy looks like.
Yeah.
So in totality, when people read Know Your Price, they're going to see, oh, I know why he is a Black woman as the cover. Because what I've been trying to say, and I didn't arrive to this, I didn't start off with this premise, but I certainly in there after doing the research. You can actually become a more democratic, fair, and just society by investing in Black women. You know, by
Mhm.
by investing in the Black politician, investing in the Black woman entrepreneur, investing in homes where Black women live. That can actually be a strategy for the country's upliftment.
Mhm.
You know, it can be. You know, so
Mhm.
for me, it's about recognize the value and strength in Black communities.
Yeah. So the last question from student Catherine Miller asks, what can or should higher education do?
Oh man, let me tell you, higher ed saved my life. You know, it's one of the few places that you actually still can meet people of different views and actually have a good conversation about the
Mhm.
things we want to talk about anyway.
Mhm.
So it is still a place where there's a lot of um, people coming together to talk about ideas because we're so busy attacking people and not ideas
Mm.
that people walk away bitter and scarred in these big discourse this discourse around race. But when you're in a college setting, it actually there's still a lot of tension, but some of the best conversations and learnings I've had were in a college setting. In addition, colleges, all educational institutions have a responsibility to the town. What I don't like about a lot of urban institutions is that they almost see themselves as a city inside of a city,
Yeah.
and they don't understand that they're also part of the infrastructure. So when we're building out broadband, if campuses aren't making broadband available to their neighbors, they're just not being a good neighbor.
Neighbor.
You know?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if when they're building out dormitories and there's a new street and they're not extending it to the community, then what are you doing?
Hmm.
You know, universities first and foremost should add value, not to just the people who are using it. That's exploited.
Mm.
It should add value to the community overall. Remember,
Hmm.
higher ed started off largely by training farmers on how to build better crops. We should be helping the community be a better community.
Yeah. Yeah.
But many universities, they're like,
Hmm.
that's there's town and gown, this issues. You know, one of the reasons why I actually agreed to run charter schools, because I thought it was important for a university just to not train teachers and say, look at the school district, they're messing things up. If you want to prove yourself, run a school, see how hard it is.
Hmm.
You know, now universities don't have to go that far, but they should be completely ensconced in
In
the
the community.
community.
Yeah.
Like, and if they're not, then they're not doing what we pay taxes for. You know, if you are at USC, you're benefiting from taxpayer contributions.
Hmm.
That there must be a return on that investment, right? And if you're not getting a return, you should have some issues. And that's one of the reasons why I will say this: higher ed is in trouble, because a lot of people see soaring tuitions, then they
Hmm.
see, but they don't see the return if they don't go to the university.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about living up to what we're supposed to do, or higher ed leaders are supposed to do, is making sure that the community benefits from our existence.
Yeah. Because the more the community benefits, the more the community advocates and wants you to remain alive.
Exactly.
But
You know,
yeah.
and it has to be more than a football team.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like a lot of people will rally behind the football team, and they don't necessarily have to go to the University of South Carolina,
Yeah. Hmm.
but they'll come to the game. No. We need to rally for more than a football team. What about
Hmm.
the chemistry department? What
Hmm.
about the history department? What
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
like they should have a product that the community can cheer as well. You
Mm.
know, that they should see professors as champions of the community. And if they're not doing that, there's something wrong with higher ed.
Yeah. 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 All right. So I end every episode of the lounge with these quick fire questions in honor of Inside the Actor Studio. So, you know, this whole concept kind of came from my love of the old show Inside the
Yep.
Actor Studio. And so Bernard, James Lipton borrowed these set of questions from
Who
Bernard
recently
Pivot.
died, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. I think when you say recent, I don't know how.
Oh no.
A
He's
couple years
no.
ago. Yeah. But he borrowed these lists of questions from the scholar Bernard Pivot, and they're kind of random. I've adapted some of them, whatever. But he would ask the same questions and end the session with every scholar, or with every actor. And so I'm doing the same thing with these scholars. So, what is your favorite word?
Oh, cross-pollination.
What?
Cross-pollination. I learned that in biology when probably in high school or something, but it was such a metaphor for me.
Mm,
Like, you need to be able to cross-pollinate between different sectors, different people. You need to
yeah.
be able to share. So cross-pollination by far.
Wow. Okay. What is your least favorite word?
Ecosystem. I can't stand it. Actually, there's a
Well, like I used it like 5 times.
so because while it is also a term I probably learned in biology, it's used oftentimes to separate from the community. So people will say the business ecosystem or the so-and-so ecosystem. I'm like, no, the community is the ecosystem. Why
Yeah,
not
yeah,
say
yeah, yeah.
community?
Yeah, as
So
if it's not fluid. Yeah.
yeah, it's right. So for me, I just think it's an overused term, you know. And wait a second, there's another one. Uh, no, I'll just stay with ecosystem.
Okay. Okay. What excites you professionally?
Oh man, writing. That
Okay.
I actually get a joy. There's sometimes I'll write a sentence and I'll just jump out of my seat and
Right.
I'll
You're
just
like,
get
man, that was good. That was good.
that was I'll be
Thought I
like
was the only one that did. No.
I'll be like, whoa, like, and you know when you hit it, you know when you hit that note, and I literally will jump out my seat.
Yeah.
And I get more excitement. So today I had two wonderful opportunities to speak. I'm speaking with you, and I
Thank
spoke
you.
with the Washington Post. I spoke with the Washington Post, their post
Put me in
live
with the
event
Washington Post.
with the Nobel laureate, you know, some dude Nobel laureate, you know, but you and that was important. And but I have to say, the writing part to get there is, it's like that's what beats my heart. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
no
Yeah. Yeah.
question about it.
What? Give me one favorite book dealing with race in life. It could be fiction or nonfiction.
Oh, um, oh my goodness, Toni Moore's Bluest Eye.
Bluest Eye. Okay.
Bluest Eye, no question, changed my life. I read it actually in college, my freshman year. Changed my life. My life. It um it- everything from standards of beauty to really thinking about history differently. Like it changed my life. And actually, a lot of the things I write, I've mentioned Toni Morrison before. It wasn't, I'm not you know, I would never ever say I'm a writer like she is, or was. Um, but I learned from her, like like some of the principles, no question. Bluest Eye though, hands down.
Yeah. What's your favorite protest song?
Oh, We Shall Overcome. I mean, there's there's another there's another one. Um, it's not a protest song, but Old Man River by Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is my favorite civil rights figure. I named my son Robeson. Um, we call him Roby, just like folks called Robeson Roby. Um, and he was so multifaceted. He was an athlete, he was a singer, civil rights activist. And I remember just reading about him. I might have started reading him in college, maybe a little bit after. And I was like, why don't people, all they play is Old Man River, you know, but once when I listened to the song, I was like, wow, this is a powerful song. And so, or, you know, Kendrick Lamar, We Gonna Be All Right. We making that into a protest anthem. But I see I have several there. I'm breaking the rule. But, you know, you could, anything off the It Takes a Million to Hold Us Back, the Public Enemy classic album. Oh my God. But then Fight the Power in the next album, A Fear of a Black Planet.
All right, listen, you making a
Oh, my
playlist.
bad.
Okay.
Oh, my bad.
Okay, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh man, you know, I can't even imagine me doing anything else. You know, I found my love, and it comes in different forms. Like you know, there's not much difference between me being a professor and me doing what I do now. I don't teach. I mean, I'm a scholar in residence at American, but as a scholar at Brookings, all I do is research and write. But I do this so often where it gives me an ability to teach. But I have never really tried anything else. I mean, I've only been in academic institutions.
Yeah.
And so if I did, it would be, man, I would be like a sound engineer. You know,
Mhm,
I think working behind the boards, listening to music.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and so maybe sound engineer, but
Okay.
I can't even imagine like doing anything else but writing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, what would you suck at?
Oh, there's no question I would be a terrible pilot.
What is it about pilot? Do you understand that maybe of the 6 people that I've been on this, I think 4 or 5 of y'all have said pilot.
Yeah. I you know, I think one, you have to sit there, and my mind wanders a lot. Like, so
Okay,
when
yeah,
you're
no, we don't
writing,
need you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. When you're writing, you're allowing different things. So I
Yeah.
do sit there, I guess. But but I- there's so much stimulus coming from all over the place.
Mhm.
I have no interest in being a pilot. I have no, oh, no. Let me, I would have been the dude, um, what Nate Robinson. I would have been Nate Robinson at this last fight. I would never be a boxer. Never.
Okay.
I get knocked out. Knocked out. I mean, I know I look kind of rugged and rough in my
Do you? Okay.
yeah.
So,
But I would never be a boxer. I get
never
knocked out.
boxer, never pilot. All right. If heaven exists or whatever afterworld you might believe in, if you believe in afterworld, what would you like to hear God, Allah, Ra, whoever that entity might be, say when you arrive?
Go back down. You're not
You're not
go
finished.
go back. I'm like, no. Yeah, I wanted to say go back, do it again. No, there's no more room. That's what I want him to say. No more room. Go back.
That's fantastic. That means that's a life that you're enjoying.
Exactly.
All
Exactly.
right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Perry. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, anytime. I just want to say, go get Know Your Price. Go get Know
Yes,
Your.
yes. And where can they get this t-shirt? Because
Oh yeah, yeah.
people have been asking about the t-shirts I wear, and I keep forgetting to put it on there.
Bailiwick Clothing. It's
Can you put
BAIL.
it in the chat?
Yep.
Are you able to write in the chat? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Bailey, hold on. Like, I'm gonna actually get the link and give y'all the Wick Clothing Company. Yes, here we
okay,
go.
yeah. So while he's getting that, I want to thank everyone for rocking with us this semester through all of the faculty lounges. I appreciate all of the love and support. I'm glad that people have enjoyed it and found it to be a stimulating space to engage, some topics that aren't necessarily easy. This is exhausting work, but it's important work. And so thank you all so much. We will be coming back next semester, and we hope to see y'all then. And everybody have a fantastic end to the semester. All right, and so we got that in there. All right, thank you, Andre.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye. All right, so you can go ahead and depart. I think South Carolina ETV is going to